As president of the G7 this year, Boris Johnson wants to improve global climate protection this year with an idea from the recently that was recently kind of abandoned in the EU. He wants to get the industrialized countries excited about a CO2 tax on imported goods. There is a lot of economic calculation behind this, but it would also help Germany. Boris Johnson took over the presidency of the G7 on January 1st. In June, he invites the heads of state and government of the 7 large industrialized countries, USA, Canada, UK, Germany, France, Italy and Japan, to a summit in Cornwall. Climate protection projects should then be right at the top of the agenda. Johnson announced this in November. But now the Bloomberg News Agency, citing insiders, reports what will be the heart of the UK's presidency: a CO2 border tax. This tax is intended to cover goods that are delivered from a country with lower environmental protection requirements to a country with higher requirements. The meaning behind this is that it would otherwise be illogical for individual countries to implement climate-friendly policies that lead to higher costs. If, for example, steel manufacturers in Germany have to comply with stricter emission regulations and pay extra for every ton of CO2 they blow out, they are at an international disadvantage compared to manufacturers who produce steel in countries without such laws. Climate damaging laws would then be economically rewarded, to say that like this. One idea to compensate for this disadvantage of more climate-friendly politics is a border tax on the CO2 emission resulting from the production of goods. The idea is not new. Around 10 years ago, the European Union was on the verge of introducing such a tax, and they are still discussing it over and over again. But that has not happened to this day, even if the tax is also part of the Green Deal by EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The tax is controversial. On the one hand, it is a question of which countries should be affected by it and which sectors are included. For example, the original EU plan envisaged taxing international air traffic as well. Airlines that would have flown in from abroad to an EU country would then have had to pay an extra fee on the fuel used. But because this is already one of the biggest cost factors for airlines, the protest was gigantic. The decisive nail in the coffin has so far been the attitude of emerging and developing countries to the topic. For many, their favorable production conditions, which often go hand in hand with poor climate protection and lower wages, are the basis of their economy, together with tourists from richer countries whose flights would also become more expensive due to a CO2 border tax. 23 countries, including the US, China, Brazil, India and Russia, had threatened retaliation if the EU introduced such a tax. The economic benefits of such a tax are also controversial. In theory, it should also encourage other countries to adopt stricter climate protection requirements. According to this logic, a German company would then, for example, purchase crude oil products from Saudi Arabia rather than from Russia, because the desert oil is produced with lower CO2 emissions than the Siberian oil and would be subject to a lower tax. That would trigger a competition between the producing countries, which would lead to better climate protection. In practice, however, there is a risk that German corporations will simply pass the surcharges on to their customers because they consider the costs of converting their supply chains to be too high. Conversely, in this scenario, disadvantaged emerging countries would also make their borders more impermeable to EU goods, for example, with punitive tariffs or by trading less with the EU than with China, for example. Johnson's concern as G7 president is therefore to first create a global alliance. The first goal at the Cornwall summit is to sign a non-binding declaration in which all 7 countries agree on the basic idea of such a tax. That would be a step forward. In the past 4 years, the US under Donald Trump had refused to make any climate protection declarations. His successor, Joe Biden, had already announced that he would put climate protection back on the agenda, and he already has shown that. For Great Britain, this is also about self-protection. The country has set itself very ambitious goals for reducing CO2 emissions, but this threatens to fall behind economically because companies that blow off high emissions prefer to relocate their plants to less regulated countries. A G7 alliance would at least make that a little more difficult. The EU will also be represented at the summit with von der Leyen, and the G7 have also invited the heads of state of Australia, that's Scott Morrison, of India, that's Narendra Modi, and of South Korea, that's Moon Jae-in. And before I say something about the future, don't forget to watch my live stream today at 6 p.m. CET. I hope to see you there. And if you want to stay informed, please subscribe to my channel and to my other channels. I'll see you in my next video. Auf Wiedersehen.